Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Andrew Moran, Sarah Cowgill, Dave Patterson, Scott Cosenza, and Graham Noble. For the year-end special, we've added a twist. For today only, we shall be called the Conservative Six, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On today's episode, 2021, what a strange trip it's been. Show me the money. No, really, the swamp spending spree report is in, and it's as bad as you might expect. Legislative hits and misses. What hath the Biden administration wrought? So far, nothing. We'll tackle a tough one for our exclusive Member Zone subscribers, order in the court. What have we seen and where are we headed in the justice system? It may surprise you, folks. And the biggest story of the year, in our opinion, will lay out what it is and what it means for our country. And finally, we'll play around in our Just for Fun segment, a fan favorite, where you never know what you'll learn. All this and more coming up in this edition of the Conservative Five. For the last 7 years, the gentleman from Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul, has released his Festivus report on wasteful government spending. This year, folks, is a doozy. No wonder the Biden bunch has moved the needle of national debt higher than a few $1 trillion. Here are a few highlights. American taxpayers paid $4.2 billion in bad loans to the Paycheck Protection Program. Add in $36 billion in unemployment insurance payments, and no wonder nobody wants to work. And here's a head scratcher, $1.27 million to one Baltimore school to COVID relief for students who weren't even enrolled. So you may ask, what does the Government Accounting Oversight Department do all day? Here's the kicker for me, panel. Why did we spend $8 billion to build border walls in the Middle East and North Africa when we're really the ones who need it? But Congress wouldn't even approve the $5 billion requested by President Trump in 2017 for a U.S.-Mexican border wall. Well, such questions can only bring us to our secret weapon, Liberty Nation's economic savant, Andrew Moran. Andrew, I know you're such a fan of government spending. Not.
Yeah, well, there's another great item on that list. It says that the U.S. government spent $1.3 million to see if hearing bad news causes you to be unhappy. Just reading through the budget alone makes anyone unhappy. You just want to kill yourself reading all these numbers and all the deficit that goes into it. But if you read Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, one of his great lines was that of the 4 different ways to spend money, one of them was spending someone else's money on someone else. And that's the whole nature of government. Government, they don't care about value. They don't care about protecting your money. They have this huge cash, all this cash and printing press, just spend it on anything you want. You constantly see this waste, but nothing ever changes. And that's what's frustrating the most. But at the same time, $52 billion, which is what the Festivus report noted, that's a fraction of the budget. The budget alone is $6 trillion. It's the massive big ticket spending items that should be constantly frowned upon. You have $1 trillion for defense or military spending. You have $1 trillion in entitlement spending. You have $800 billion in welfare spending. That's what's killing, the American, the Uncle Sam in his wallet, not these, frivolous, ridiculous, I think it was $150,000 on vacations for South Korean teenagers to attend a climate change conference. What the heck is this? What's going on with these budget makers?
Well, joining us especially today for our end of the year C5, making us the special C6 is J. David Patterson, our military affairs correspondent. Dave, I got to ask you, did the Biden administration skimp on the budget for the Afghan withdrawal?
Well, from a strictly budget perspective, it's actually the Trump appropriation, and there's plenty of money there to have done it correctly. But from a contingency cost perspective, Lisa, I think that it probably cost more in the bumbling and fumbling way the administration executed than it would have otherwise. But if you're talking about skimping, the only thing that was skimped on was good judgment.
Oh, well said. Now, Scott, I know you're a personal fan of letting everyone else spend money on you. So what's the problem here?
Maybe this is the one positive thing about inflation is that this massive debt that we're incurring will be worth basically zero by the time we're carrying around our paychecks in giant laundry baskets like the Weimar Republic fall.
Oh gosh. Well, Sarah, you're in red state territory. What do the hardworking folks in middle America have to say about all this Festivus spending?
They figured they can save the government about $52 billion if they would just cut it out. Everybody is very money conscious around here. They're thrifty. They keep tinfoil in the drawer after using it. I mean, we don't throw anything out in red states. So when they see things like the schools getting COVID relief, for one school for getting COVID relief, and there's no students that were enrolled there, it enrages people, because people work hard for their money and they want to hang on to it any way they can. They don't want to see the government spending dollars on stupid, frivolous things, or on people in other countries when we don't have a wall.
Yeah, and we're massively in debt, Graham. I mean, that's the problem. It's nice to share and share alike with the rest of the world when you're, flush, but we're in debt to trillions. Andrew, what is it now? 21 trillion?
$29 trillion in national debt.
Okay, I was close. Go ahead, Graham.
Well, I think they're long past the point where they even care. I mean, there was a time when the folks in Congress actually pretended to care about spending and fiscal responsibility. And I really think we've gotten to the point they literally do not care anymore. It's like, we will spend, and when I say spend, of course, I really mean we will print as much as we need to do to cover whatever expenses we want to cover. And I think because eventually we're going to get to the point where I believe all money is electronic, and there's really no such thing as paper money anymore. And I figure that politicians are thinking, well, when that day comes, essentially all the money that anybody has is going to be kind of theoretical, if you like. It's going to be out there in the I guess what Facebook would describe as the metaverse. And so no one will really know how much money anybody's got anymore. And I think that's part of this, we simply don't care anymore.
Andrew, is he making the case for everybody to go crypto?
Well, actually, these governments that are employing digital money, like they're called CBDCs, and they don't use crypto. It's just the fiat money goes digital. So China right now, they're one of the leaders of employing the digital yuan, and they're trying to have greater cross-border transactions and trying to increase the yuan's standing of international reserves. And so far, it's working, because a lot of this de-dollarization push that's happening, in that region among the BRIC nations. And also, one more thing too about the whole budget and this whole Festivus report. One of the biggest budgetary items every year is the interest on the debt. Last year, the United States spent $300 billion just to service that debt. Once the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, which right now, according to the FOMC projections, it's going to be 3 rate hikes next year, the government's going to be paying even more on this national debt. So this is just, once again, these massive budget items are being ignored, and we're all focusing on the pennies when these dollars should be monitored.
Exactly. Well, based on Senator Paul's Festivus report, the U.S. government wasted $52 billion plus of money from the American taxpayer. And that begs the question, why do we give France $200,000 to teach them about American culture? For the love of Pete, just Google it or look up Wikipedia. Thanks, panel. The Democrats have been lingering around the hallowed halls of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for less than a year now. And so it begs the question, what's been accomplished? Well, historic inflation highs and embarrassingly low approval ratings, and not a lot else, seem to be the answer. The Biden agenda has battled for Build Back Better, amnesty for illegal aliens, and election reform, to which our own Graham Noble calls, quote, ensuring Democrats never lose again, end quote. Pundits say this lack of progress could send a signal, a red tsunami come 2022 midterms. Democrats are posturing with the stiff upper lip while conservatives are plotting for big wins across the board. Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble, has an idea of what went wrong and where Dems might go in 2022. Graham, please regale us with your wit and wisdom.
Well, Lisa, I think Democrats would say what really went wrong is just having too many of those pesky Republicans in Congress. Overall, I think it might have been better for the American people if all Congress had passed this year was gas. And I do intend to reach out to the office of Representative Eric Swalwell to ask him how much gas was passed this year and how much of it was his. But here's a rundown of
On
the
camera.
3 pieces. Here's a rundown of the 3 pieces of legislation that are still in the works, but that would have the most significant effect on America's cultural, political, and economic future. We got the For the People Act of 2021, which, yes, I call the Ensuring Democrats Never Lose Again Act. In broad terms, it's a federal government takeover of elections. And personally, I can't think of any greater threat to election integrity. Next, well, with that one, Democrats didn't waste any time, by the way, because they introduced that on January 4th of 2021. Every Republican voted against it. Every Democrat voted for it, with one courageous exception. Representative Benny Thompson of the great state of Mississippi, which I now call home, actually voted no. That bill is currently in a holding pattern in the Senate, which may be for better or worse. The US Citizenship Act of 2021, that's another one. Essentially, this is blanket amnesty for illegals. I like to call this the Allowing Illegals to Vote Democrat Act. It was introduced in February. Again, they didn't waste any time, and that's still in committee. And lastly, Build Back Better, what's commonly known as the Build Back Better Act. I like to call it the grubby little socialist fingers in everything act. This monstrosity affects everything from education, healthcare, and taxes to immigration and environmental policy. It was introduced in the House in September. It passed, and it has gone off to the Senate. No Republicans voted for it, but 2 Democrats did vote against it. That's it, Lisa.
Well, Graham loaded his legislative Gatling gun there, Dave. Actually, I want to have Sarah take this on. It's interesting because what we've noticed lately in polls is that Latin vote that the Democrats are so counting on, they're starting to be a little shifty there. What do you say, Sarah?
It's funny. Any either naturalized Hispanic or people who have come here legally and gotten their citizenship, they do not appreciate the illegal alien argument of just open the doors. They did it the right way. They've been here forever. They're Americans. They don't want to see their own world compromised by where they might have come from 200 or 300 or 400 years ago or last year. It's interesting to see that the Hispanics are turning red almost to the number like say, the Cubans did in Miami. Yeah. It's a big number. And the Democrats just don't have that support anymore. You can't count on that.
Yeah. Dave, do you feel that there was any legislative headway made in the area of military affairs, or any that should have been made, or maybe? Well,
I think we've experienced what we have experienced almost now historically, and that is that the congressional legislators do not do their job. We only ask them to do one thing: pass a budget. And they have failed to do that repeatedly. You have an authorization bill that passes in the last of the first quarter of the next year. You have an appropriations bill that has yet to be passed. They only have one thing to do, and they're supposed to get it done before September 30th. And they have failed to do that continually. In fact, the exception is when they do pass a budget. And that is extremely hurtful to the Department of Defense. If they had a full year appropriation or continuing resolution this year, it would cost the Department of Defense $40 billion, almost as much as the Festivus bill.
Andrew, I'm wondering if your libertarian bones are rattling when it comes to, passing budgets and everything. Maybe you're in the camp of no, don't pass. Stay, less you do, the better.
Yeah, of course, because one of the main problems with all these budgets is the government does too much. There's too much governance going on. That's why you have these $6 trillion bills. And this isn't just the federal government. All the state and many of the state and local governments do the exact same thing. They spend all this money. There isn't any plan. They just will throw money at the problem. And so that's one of the main issues. And we just discussed all this interventionism going on in the previous segment at home and abroad. You have all this just wasting money, throwing money around because it's not their money, so they don't care. And then, but the other thing too is that they're irresponsible about it as well when they do pass these budgets. Because look at the debt, for instance. The debt to taxpayer is about $20,000 per taxpayer, $20,000, and then you have the interest per adult. I think that's about $14,000. So right there, you have tens of thousands of dollars that taxpayers on the hook for all this wasted spending, and a lot of this spending that they were even alive to see. And a lot of this money, a lot of this debt occurred in the 70s and the 80s, 90s. So these generations of future generations are going to be stuck with the bill. I've always said that you can't kick the can down the road any further, but I think politicians have mastered the art of doing that because they're able to get away with it and nothing happens. The US dollar, I mean, that's still a strong currency. It's still the international reserve currency of the world. The US dollar index, which is a basket of currencies, and it surged 7% this year. And why? There's no justification for it. There's just everyone else is incompetent. So people think that, hey, the United States government is the least incompetent institution in the world.
Yeah. I personally think a big hit was that, Manchin held back the big Build Back Better, which I think would have been just a disaster, not just monetarily, but also, digging into our personal bank account, just too much. It was just too broad ranging. It was another one of those, you have to pass it to understand it things, which is ridiculous. Scott, any final legislative hits and misses in your estimation?
Well, when you consider that the administration achieved these accomplishments with the first ever woman vice president, a Canadian, Caribbean, Californian, I mean, it's you have to say that they had to work twice as hard to accomplish half as much. So hats off to them.
Well, are we experiencing stagnation without representation? How long will Americans put up with a do-nothing government? But maybe that's a good thing. We've got our thumb on the pulse, so stay tuned to Liberty Nation News. Thanks, panel. What a long, strange, tripping kind of year it's been. The coverage provided by Liberty Nation News tells the tale. COVID was an early attention getter, followed by high-profile trials. Immigration made the news until I guess it wasn't flattering to the vice president, and the state of Virginia finally glowed bright red, which I am happy to say since I live in Virginia. But the most important story of the year has been our withdrawal from Afghanistan. That event sparked an immediate takeover by the Taliban and all of its inglorious collateral damage. Without further ado, the correspondent who led nearly every media outlet in the coverage of the Afghanistan debacle, David Patterson, is here with us today. Dave was also talking about the buildup on the Ukraine-Russian border long before the big boys. He may scare the bejesus out of us, but he does know his stuff. Welcome to the panel, Dave. Let her rip.
Thank you, Lisa. The Biden administration and its foreign policy is such a rich orchard of gaffes for grabbing low-hanging fruit that, let's talk about Afghanistan and the mess the entire national security leadership made of the retreat. And it was a retreat. There's no question about that. And that's the only word to describe the debacle. The disaster started actually in April when Biden thought he'd be politically cute and make September 11th the date Americans would be out of Afghanistan. Well, I guess cooler heads prevailed in the administration, because when the political cuteness gag was pointed out to the administration, Biden's team immediately landed on August 31st, which was put immediately into concrete. But why that date? You have to ask yourself. And why not the end of the calendar year? There is no reason for that date. But nonetheless, that's where the debacle actually started. And after that, you had the failure of the government, or the US government, to provide adequate air support for the Afghan security forces, the abandonment of Bagram Air Base, which would have been useful in the withdrawal. And then one of the things that gets very little in the way of coverage was when the Taliban actually asked the United States to provide security within Kabul, and they asked General McKenzie if he would do that. they were having a terrible time with lawlessness inside Kabul and asked the United States to provide policing, and Mackenzie declined. Imagine that would have expanded the security ring around the Kabul airport, and we would maybe not have had the killing of the 13 American soldiers and Marines and the one naval member. And then of course, Liberty Nation wrote about it extensively, the hasty drone strike that killed 10 civilians. And no one is accountable for that. The next subject, I think, is Ukraine, and it's an entirely different kettle of fish, of course. But as you pointed out, the Liberty Nation has been following this for almost a year now, and the buildup of Russian combat forces on the eastern Ukraine border. And with the exception of periodic skirmishes between Russian-backed separatists and the Ukraine military, it's been reasonably calm, except for the Russian maneuvers and posturing on the border. But from a global geopolitical perspective, I think that Putin wants to establish and preserve respect as a legitimate great power peer. And Putin's a very clever guy. You got to give it to him. He put those troops in position to establish a cause for negotiating for what he wants. The Kremlin wants written assurances from the United States and NATO that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO. Well, of course, that's a non-starter. And the United States told him it was a non-starter from the very beginning. He also wants NATO and US to guarantee that they won't station troops in the Ukraine. Well, nobody's going to agree to that. And then Moscow wants guarantees. Now, this is a clever one, that no NATO or US naval vessels will operate close enough to Russia to be a threat. Well, that pretty much rules out the Black Sea, where we have operations going on routinely. But you take these two events, these two worldwide events, and you put them in context, and you look at them together. It's a wonder anyone respects or admires the United States, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, Graham, you mentioned earlier that I guess in the previous segment, and folks, if you haven't seen it, you have to watch them all, that you're former military, but I can't let this opportunity go by, because we were both working the weekend of that infamous drone strike, and we both felt in our bones that it was just one of those, okay, let's show strength, get me anybody to kill. It felt off.
Yes, it did. I remember that well. And I remember the two of us discussing the fact before the drone strike happened, the two of us discussed the idea that at some point after that first attack, after that first bombing, that at some point the administration was going to come out and say, well, we just launched a drone strike and we took out the people responsible. And of course, who they took out to this day, we don't know for sure. They ended up saying that they took out a planner, an ISIS planner and facilitator, whatever that means. I understand what those labels were supposed to mean, but they could have taken out, some poor shepherd somewhere, quite frankly, a goat herder. We have no idea. And I think that particular incident really, it set the tone for this completely irresponsible way in which this whole withdrawal was conducted. And of course, I don't have to go into the details because Dave has covered this all for Liberty Nation very well. But the entire thing, from the point of view of myself, a veteran, it was a complete unmitigated disaster, and there was no excuse for any of it. People should be appalled.
So in summation, what Dave was saying and what Graham was saying, and this is just my little pea brain, this administration is a disaster. It's incompetent when it comes to national security issues in our military.
Well,
right?
Yeah. And I do think we have some indication that ended up being a water carrier and a bunch of kids, or
I believe it was an NGO worker,
right.
And he basically also, 10 people were killed. That fellow plus others, and 7 of them were children. And
and there were actually 2 separate strikes here. The first, there was an initial drone strike, which was actually where they took out a car traveling near the Pakistani border, and that's the one where they tried to say, well, we killed ISIS planners, and that's the one where to this day, we don't really know who they killed. And then there was that second strike actually in Kabul, which was the tragic one, which killed a non-governmental organization worker who was just delivering water, and also killed, I guess, a great many members of his family, most of them children.
Right. Well, politically speaking, it's interesting because Dave has a series coming out. You really should hit libertynation.com, and he's looking into, who's our biggest threat, Russia or China. But, Andrew, I wanted to talk about that with you because on the economic front, there's a lot of threat from China.
Yeah, there is, but it's not always as China. This is more of a regional approach. I mentioned in a previous segment about how a lot of these regional countries, they're engaged in a de-dollarization campaign. They're trying to get off the dollar. So, for instance, Russia, they completely prohibited any use of dollars at Russian seaports. You also converse in rubles now. You also have the currency swap agreements between China and Russia that keeps getting extended and worth billions of dollars in transactions. But the BRICS are also part of this too. There's a lot of these BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. They want to, get off the dollar. They want to stop relying so much on the United States dollar. And Iran too. Iran is a perfect example of this, how they want all the other countries to stop using the dollar so they can completely divert away from or avert to these economic sanctions that are applied on their country and, become another economic player thanks to their vast crude oil reserves. And if I may ask Dave one question, I remember reading as early as 2018 that a lot of these military brass, they warned that a military victory can never be achieved in Afghanistan. So my question is, could the U.S. have ever left Afghanistan without similar chaos unfolding? Let's say, Biden kept the May deadline. Wouldn't this still have happened?
I think that if he had kept the May deadline, it probably would have been worse because you would have had less time to prepare. But to your point, I think that what is important when we ever enter into any sort of military action, you have to have a clear, understandable objective. We never have had that in Afghanistan. So you never knew when it was over because the goalposts kept being moved every time you thought about it. And the idea that you must know what winning looks like. And people need to understand what it looks like. You never put a date certain when you'll be leaving because people will wait you out. You must have a clear objective for what winning looks like and what it means.
I'll finish up by saying the stories from active servicemen and women were frankly heartbreaking for me and for so many red-blooded Americans, from our canine soldiers left in crates at the airport. That was head spinning. The world watched as the U.S. left people behind. Gold Star moms fumed publicly. One mother called the president of the United States feckless. Former military leaders demanded an accounting and received nothing but lip service. How can Joe Biden justify what has been done to our people and our country and our reputation? I don't know, folks. We're at a crossroads. Thanks so much for tuning in. Keep the faith. What a strange year it's been. And to go out on a high note, we're playing a brand new game. Remember, audience, this is all in fun, which is why we call it Just for Fun. This week, we're calling our game The Quickest Fix. I will call out a panel member and ask them to solve a political problem the fastest way possible, just to show that we're at least as smart as those representing us in government. All right, let's begin with our funny man, Andrew Moran. And Andrew, I believe you must respond in character. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, solve inflation.
There's during World War II, there was Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than the he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
Are you going to say seriously now? Seriously now? I'm being serious, no joke.
I'm sorry. What was the question again?
All right. I see you're streaming Biden on the way. I'll give you another 30 seconds to solve it. I don't think you're going to come up with anything, though, are you?
Well, I think to calm down to the 390-year high deflation, we need the Goldman Sachs to start printing trillions. We need the the thing, the Speaker of the House
and
to
I'm being
finally
serious
start spending
now.
money.
I'm
and
totally
no joke,
serious.
no joke.
No
We need
joke,
the Speaker
no
of the
joke.
House to finally start.
All right.
spending
Come
money.
on, man. Come on now. Stop it. Okay, Scott, let's make the biggest reform in Supreme Court history. Go.
Ban all alumni of the Harvard University School of Law and Yale University School of Law from being Supreme Court justices. And
I see. I see. Princeton escaped. Wait a minute. There used to be quite a few Princetonians.
No, there's
on there.
there's no law school at Princeton, actually, Lisa.
There isn't. Okay.
Undergrads are fine. They can go anywhere, but it's the law schools I want to focus on.
Oh,
we need not reach down way past like the 50th law school rankings, like the Hastings College of Law, where Kamala Harris went to school, for instance. We can keep it in the top 10, but eliminating Yale and Harvard, I think, would do wonders to fix a lot of the judgments coming from the court.
Okay, no more skull and bones inside the court, right? Order in the court. Sarah, 3, 2, 1. Solve immigration.
Build the wall.
Okay,
build the wall.
that was easy. Well, no, wait a minute. All our money's going to the Mideast and Africa to build.
I know. Build it here.
Yeah.
Build the wall here.
All right, that was easy. Okay, Graham, pass one piece of legislation of your choosing.
We shouldn't really need to do this because we have something called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But if I was going to pass one piece of legislation, it would be, I don't know what I'd call it or how I would word it exactly, but it would be a piece of legislation which brings down the most severe punishments upon any official, federal, state, or local who violates anybody's constitutional rights in any way.
I personally think a good one would be to have a cognitive test for anybody taking the presidency of the United States.
Term limits. I'd go with term limits, but
Okay. Dave, stop the biggest threat to national security in 30 seconds. Go.
Okay. Well, first we all have to recognize that China, not climate change, is the biggest military and economic threat facing the
Oh,
US.
Dave.
But now I'm willing to give a little and say that, well, okay, let's combine China and climate change as being threats. Now we'll establish a new organization within the State Department that will negotiate the opportunity for us, the United States, to install charging stations throughout China so that when our military fully electrified will invade, we'll have charging stations to keep the forces moving.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. There is that they're trying to go fully electric, right? Which is
Dave, what percentage of those charging stations would be set aside for non-traditional, non-minority construction projects? That's what I want to know. Is there justice in the offing there?
Absolutely, and that will mean that you rank order by those classes, those people who are charging forward at the point.
Well, here in the DC metropolitan area, what all this means is that they're taking away extra parking spaces. So now there's the handicapped and there's expectant mothers, and now there's charging stations, and all the charging station parking spaces are completely empty all the time. That's all. All right. Who wants to give me one quick fix? Quick.
I gotcha.
Well, I'll do it. I'll do it, Torn.
You want to do it?
Yeah. New York Mets or Boston Red Sox?
Oh my
You gotta stop
goodness.
Come on now.
That's a very quick fix. Very quick.
Okay, you answer that and then you get a real question.
The Mets. The Mets. Let's go Mets. The Amazons. All right, Sarah.
All right, here's your real question.
Uh-oh.
Andrew wants another 10 minutes of fame. Replace the vice presidency with?
Oh, whom?
Yeah.
How about somebody who can think on their feet? And do they have to be a Democrat?
Well, yeah, right now.
You could let them pick a governor who's going to step in if they die. That's a good, they're already a leader. They're already elected by one state, something like that. But you gotta have somebody, just in case they croak. Somebody's got to be able to step right into it, I think.
Yeah, I can't think of a Democrat that would make a good vice president. I got nothing for you. Anybody else?
I would say that since the Constitution does not stipulate that the president and the vice president have to be from the same party, I would say Trump.
We had differing parties at one point, Graham. I don't think it worked out terribly well, if I remember my history books.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I think if you wanted someone who could do no harm, you might have an autographed picture of Alfred E. Newman, and that would work.
What, me worry?
That's me worry.
Well, now you know the Liberty Nation quick fix plan, folks. Anyway, we hope you played along. And remember to share your quick fixes to America's problems with us in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and pop on over to libertynation.com for a little bit of sanity, analysis, and the very best in political humor, including Andrew Moran doing an impression of Joe Biden. And don't forget to check out our daily memes to keep a smile on your face. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, surf on over to libertynation.com. Sign up for our new member zone, just $29.99 for a year. Special thanks to our fantastic editor and post coordinator, Frank DiOrio, and our amazing executive producer, Sarah Cowgill. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief. Thanks for joining us today. This has been a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.